today to discuss the automotive industry in the EU shortly after the presentation of the Commission's Industrial Action Plan for the European automotive sector. This shows how important the automotive sector is for the EU economy, as I would like to underline that competitiveness and simplification is a top priority of Polish presidency. Let us simply remind ourselves that the automotive industry supports over 30 million direct and indirect jobs in the European Union and contributes approximately €1 trillion to our GDP. But the EU automotive sector is currently facing significant challenges, including rapid technological advancement and intensifying global competition. Urgent action is needed to safeguard the industry's future and ensure its continued growth and success within the EU. This is why we should look at the new action plan in the context of other recent proposals from the Commission, namely the Clean Industrial Deal and the Competitiveness Compass. When presenting new comprehensive plans that will impact a specific industrial sector, it is important that the views and the concerns of that sector are heard. That is why we welcome the direct contribution to the action plan from stakeholders of the automotive sector, including industry leaders. The Council has yet to examine the action plan and its various proposed actions. Today, the Commission will present it at the COMPET Council meeting, and then work will start at technical level in the Council. I would like, however, to make a few preliminary remarks. The regulation on CO2 emission performance standards for cars and vans is a key piece of legislation for the industry. In the light of slower than expected uptake of battery electric vehicles and following calls from industry, the Commission has now announced the targeted amendment of this legislation to allow car manufacturers more flexibility. We understand that the proposal will be tabled soon. The Presidency will treat this proposal swiftly and as a matter of priority. We count on the Parliament to do the same. It is essential to provide the industry with certainty without any delay. In parallel, the Commission states that it will advance the review of the regulatory ordinary due to 2026. This review must be, as foreseen in the regulatory itself, comprehensive and holistic. It should strike a balance between decarbonization targets and the needs to boost innovation and competitiveness of the European automotive industry. The action plan also addresses many other important challenges for the sector: autonomous driving, batteries, decarbonization of corporate fleets, charging infrastructure, skills, level playing field, to name just a few. But as always, the devil will be in the details. Therefore, we are looking forward to receiving more details on all the planned measures from the Commission, preferably sooner rather than later. More details on the expected timelines of the initiative list in the action plan would be also very welcome. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Minister Schwabka. And now, for the Commission, I give the floor to Apostolos Tzitzikostas.
Thank you, Madam President. Honourable members, the Commission very much welcomes this opportunity to present to the Parliament the Industrial Action Plan for the automotive sector, which was adopted on the 5th of March. It is a plan to keep Europe's car makers, suppliers and related service sectors innovative, competitive and firmly anchored in Europe. And of course, it's a plan of which I'm very proud. The automotive industry contributes today 7% of the EU GDP and employs around 14 million people, directly and indirectly. But it's not just about figures. The automotive industry is part of our history and a source of pride. Today, however, supply chain risks, energy costs, staff shortages, protectionism, and over-reliance on imported supplies are taking their toll. Our companies are falling behind on strategic technologies like batteries, software, and autonomous driving. Now, before putting pen to paper for this action plan, I spoke extensively with the industry, with manufacturers, suppliers, and many more. I listened to their concerns and their proposals, and the resulting action plan actually introduces flagship initiatives in 5 game-changing areas: innovation and digitalization, clean mobility, competitiveness and the supply chain resilience, skills, and a level playing field in the sector. We already have the finance to turn ambition into reality. Up to 50 billion euros under InvestEU for clean tech and clean mobility, 1.8 billion euros from the Innovation Fund for Battery Manufacturing, 1 billion euro from Horizon Europe for connected and autonomous vehicles and batteries, 570 million euros under the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Facility for charging points, with a focus on trucks, funding for skills and development, including 90 million euros from Erasmus Plus for training, and, of course, additional funding for SMEs. Now, starting with innovation and digitalization, we urgently need to regain our leadership in AI-powered, connected and automated vehicles, including the in-car experience. And legislation must keep up. No country in the EU today has a complete rulebook for autonomous vehicles use, but China and the US are ahead with on-road testing and commercial operators. So now it is the time to draw on one of our biggest strengths, the single market. We need to gradually harmonize EU legislation on driverless vehicles. Large-scale cross-border test beds will help us understand traffic implications, and a European Connected and Autonomous Vehicle Alliance will target cutting-edge solutions. Now, moving on to clean mobility, Europe's emission standards for new cars and vans provide long-term certainty for investors, so they remain. But we must also be pragmatic. Instead of annual compliance, we propose giving companies 3 years, 25, 26, 27 combined, to comply with the targets. We will present a focused amendment on this, and I would urge you, honourable members, to approve it without any delay, for the benefit of our automotive industry, because this is not the moment, and I want to stress that, to reopen discussions on the broader legislation. We will, however, have the chance to start the review of this legislation the second half of 2025 instead of 2026. Now, in the meantime, electric vehicles already account for 15% of EU sales. To grow that, we need to boost demand, starting with corporate fleets. They currently account for 60% of EU car registrations. Their mileage is higher, and they enter the second-hand market faster than private vehicles, making them an important market segment. While we work on the legislative proposal, we have shared national success stories. We are also encouraging social leasing schemes for lower-income citizens and faster installation of charging points. Both are crucial because mobility is a right, no matter where you live or what your income is. Now, I said it during my hearing, and once again I want to emphasize that no one should be left behind in this transition to cleaner mobility. Now, for charging points, soon We will publish recommendations on shortening the grid connection waiting time, and we are looking into whether this should become mandatory for Member States. We need to consider the entire process as a top priority so that permits can be approved faster. Let me now move to competitiveness and supply chain resilience, and in particular, batteries. They account for 30 to 40% of a typical electric car's value and drive both jobs and economic competition in Europe. Now, to compete, we need to develop a resilient battery production inside the EU, which contributes to the long-term competitiveness of the industry. We're also considering European content requirements for batteries and components that are sold here. We must never forget, however, honourable members, the social dimension. Changes to global demand and production, economic shocks, geopolitical changes and uncertainties have closed automotive plants all across Europe. Meanwhile, our workforce is ageing, so we need to train and attract workers with the skills of a digital future. A European Fair Transition Observatory will track employment trends across the automotive value chain, predicting threats and planning targeted support in advance. And we want to update the European Globalization Adjustment Fund for displaced workers so that it supports companies restructuring, reducing the risk of layoffs. Let me conclude with the fifth pillar, Madam President, the international business environment. Foreign investment in the EU automotive sector needs to contribute to the industry's long-term competitiveness. And we are looking into measures to make sure that this is the case. At the same time, we will continue to pursue free trade agreements and international partnerships for enlarged market access and, of course, for critical materials. This is how the EU will ensure a level playing field, and these actions, together with many others that are outlined in the action plan, will ensure that the next generation of vehicles is not just made in Europe, but innovated in Europe, powered by European technology and built on European values. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your views.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Tzitzikostas. And now I give the floor for the first round of political group speakers. So the EPP group being first, Jens Giesecke.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, Commissioner Tzitzikostas, Minister Schwabka, colleagues, the automotive industry is in the headlines because of the crisis. It cannot continue so, and I'm glad the Commission has realized we need a pragmatic, balanced policy for the automotive industry. And the action plan is a first useful step towards the Commission changing direction. The clock is ticking. We need flexibility on the 2035 target. We don't need factories closing. We don't need companies being fined. The Commission must put a proposal on the table at the end of the year. We need to speed up innovation. Digitalization must play more of a role. Autonomous driving, research and development is definitely something that we welcome. But although there are positive things in the action plan, it is not the answer to everything. The Commission has missed the opportunity to be specific about its intentions regarding the ban on the internal combustion engine. The Commission needs to deliver quickly. The EPP wants a holistic approach, full tech neutrality by 2035, recognition of the role of plug-in hybrids. We need better charging infrastructure, especially for e-trucks. And the EPP wants to secure the millions of jobs. We want to keep the leading position of our industry. We don't want to kill off the industry. We want to change direction. We want to get moving. Thank you.
Group Mohammed Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam President. I have to say we all have strong feelings when it comes to the car industry. We all have the same nostalgic feelings, but I must say that nostalgia is good, but not if it lets you stick in the past, not if it blocks innovation, not if it blocks change. And today I feel like I'm in the boardroom of Nokia when the iPhone was just released. The touch screen, the ability to browse on the internet and play music, it was revolutionary. The response of Nokia to try to make the keyboard phone more attractive instead of responding to innovation. And we all know how that story ended. Because by allowing car makers to not fulfill the midterm goal, it's like telling Nokia to keep on producing the keyboard phone. It will not cut it for our industry. And with these plans, with these delays to switch to zero-emission vehicles in Europe, I only see two winners. The companies that are lagging behind, that are only looking at short-term gains, and China, who already leads the EV market and sees the competition sabotaging itself. Because with this delay, we also delay the second-hand market, very important to the access of electric vehicles. We need to create the conditions for EV cars to thrive within Europe. We need to push for an electric corporate fleet, introduce social leasing to make EVs accessible for all Europeans. And while we are talking about range extenders and debate on flexibilities of penalties, of companies that made more than 100 billion in profits in the last years, China invests in solid-state batteries with a range of more than 1,500 kilometers. This cannot be our answer to plan for a successful response to these developments. And just like Nokia, it's the lack of innovation that threatens our future, not the goals we've set 8 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shaheen. And now for the PFE Group, Klára Dostálová.
Děkuji, paní předsedkyně.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, the Brussels bureaucracy has decided to play a single card, to put everything on electric cars. It's ignoring the reality of the market, the economic situation in member states, and the fate of thousands of car industry workers. The Commission wants to support battery production, but where are we going to get the raw materials? We depend on China. The Commission is talking about supporting, preserving jobs, and yet hundreds of thousands of people are going to lose their jobs. Instead of supporting the traditional car industry, we're hearing vague promises about re-skilling, as if someone on an assembly line could become an AI coder just like that. And then we hear about a just transformation. But how can you have a fair transformation when you're doing away with traditional technology, ignoring hydrogen and hybrids, and punishing those who can't afford an electric car? We need a real plan combining innovation, competitiveness. This action plan is not a solution. It's going to lead to decline.
Vondra.
Dobrý den, budu mluvit česky.
Good morning. I'm going to speak Czech because the European Commission's policy on cars is a disaster for my country. For 5 years, I've been saying the path that the Commission is forcing us down with crazy regulation, with prohibitions, it flies in the face of the wishes of the consumer, is a path to destruction. For 5 years, I've been saying this, and now here we are. What we're doing is we're sending European taxpayers' money to China and to Elon Musk. And now the Commission is trying to steer a new course. It's a bit too little too late. There are 3 things we need now. It's not enough to spread the fines across 3 years. It should be 5 years at least. Then the fixation on electric cars must stop. We really need genuine technological neutrality, including the combustion engine, synthetic fuels, and other things. And it's all very well to have a review, but it doesn't say anything about goods vehicles. We must do much more.
And Jan Gerbrandi for the Renew Europe Group.
Dank u, mevrouw de voorzitter.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, Minister. The European car industry finds itself at the heart of a perfect storm. The Chinese market's collapsing, but China and Tesla have a technological advantage because they're producing cheaper cars. The European stimulation measures being got rid of. We're lagging on infrastructure. European battery producers are going bankrupt, and the Americans are making money hand over fist. But the European car industry has taken far too long to move on to the electric vehicle, and we know that lateness here is a problem. 2028, we know the electric car will be cheaper and better than the internal combustion engine. So we have to make sure we have public-private partnerships so that Europe can produce electric vehicles more quickly and more cheaply with an agreement between the Commission and industry, with a broad-ranging agreement with innovation. But industry has to stop dragging its feet, as we're seeing that people are trying to slow down the Commission's proposals from industry, because otherwise, in a few years, the lights will be going out in every single car manufacturing plant in Europe.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, absolutely nobody in industry claims that the future is not electric for the car industry. And we're seeing the demand increase by 27%. But what's happening is we're slowing down this trend by attacking the Green Deal, conceding to a lobbyist campaign. As a commission, you're not standing up. You're opening the Pandora's box, and you're allowing the internal combustion engine ideologues to sway you, generating insecurity, uncertainty for consumers, for investors, and for business. You're not showing how we can stand up to competition from China. Well, congratulations. That's also a way of destroying business. The losers are the employees in the car industry. You can count on a resistance from us in the Greens because we count on the future.
So now Jonas Sjöstedt for the Left Group.
Fru talman.
Madam President, future jobs in the automotive industry are not going to be generated with yesterday's technologies. Now that the European Commission is worsening the environmental demands, it's helping those companies who haven't been doing their homework. Instead, it is high time to support the transition of the automotive industry in Europe. We have to give tax breaks to those who buy electric cars built in the European Union, a cheap electric car. China is providing all sorts of subsidies. We have to be able to support our industry as well. And when that support is paid, there needs to be conditions linked, good conditions, collective agreements, and that this shouldn't go to paying shareholders dividends. We need to redefine the electric market because the electricity is going up to 2 or 3 times the price competitive countries are paying. It is necessary and has to be done. We need to revise this. All of us who've worked in a car factory know this.
Thank you very much. The next is Markus Buchheit for the ESN Group.
Danke, Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a bit better late than never, but even in 2019, it was clear that we had a problem. The end of the internal combustion engine was going to be a problem. The other aspects of the Green Deal were going to be a problem in terms of the cost of thousands of jobs just in the Federal Republic of Germany. So then it was the Green Deal. Now the Commission is waking up, and now we're hearing about the global market being difficult. It's true, but why, at a difficult time for the market, do you take away from the manufacturers the niche in which they have become leaders? We have to go back to pragmatism. We need to go back to entrepreneurial freedom. And if the Greens were interested in the future, they would be interested in the freedom for entrepreneurs, for business. We don't need restrictions. Thank you, Mr. Bloss. I'm glad you agree with me. And if the EPP and the Commission want to ditch central planning and in favour of entrepreneurial freedom, then they need to go with us and not with the Greens.
Ladies and gentlemen, those employed in the car industry and the supply chain are worried. A key industry in the European Union is facing a serious crisis. The main responsibility for this needs to be placed at the foot of the national governments, such as the Germans, who stopped the national support overnight, and of course the difficult mistakes made by management. Nevertheless, I welcome your pragmatism, Commissioner. We need to show flexibility now in the 2025 target. This isn't overambitious, but at this juncture it is important to provide relief rather than impose penalties on industry. In a second stage, we need to move as fast as possible to move to technological neutrality. We need to get rid of this ban on the internal combustion engine, but we need targeted support as well for those in the middle and lower income brackets. I like your ideas on leasing, but we need to push further on this. First of all, you're talking about the Climate Social Fund. National income from ETS2 is much bigger than the Social Climate Fund. And please, talk to the European Investment Bank as well, so that that sort of subsidy can be provided straight away, rather than having to wait till 2027 when the ETS is introduced. Lastly, I'd like to talk about pooling. When we introduced this was an instrument to provide flexibility to European industry. If we do it the way it is set out on paper now, and we don't adopt your plan, it means money's going to go to China and to Tesla. And that's why it's important that your proposal be adopted as soon as possible. No money for Musk, friends.
Much. I give the floor now to Timo Volken. 1 minute.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, vielen Dank, sehr geehrter Kommissar. Die Automobilindustrie in Europa ist ein wichtiges.
Madam President, Commissioner, the automotive industry is a key employer in the European Union. There's another issue we have, and that's that many people buy second-hand cars. We need to look after the interest of the broad majority of consumers and guide them towards electric cars, because we're not going to meet our climate goals by importing fuel from Saudi Arabia and so on. We shouldn't be dependent on the fossil fuel countries. The future of mobility is electric. It's the most efficient form of mobility. And I'm sorry, synthetic fuels are something that the average citizen would never be able to afford. We're not legislating for Porsche drivers. So thank you very much. There's a great deal to do, but we're on the right track.
Minute. Prego.
L'automotive europeo è un malato.
The automotive sector in Europe is sick. It's in a parlous state. And what is the solution which is proposed? A kind of tepid attempt to do something. We're 10 years away from eliminating the internal combustion engine, but we're currently looking at around 2% for alternatives. But what are we seriously trying to do here? We need to look at supply, we need to look at what consumers actually want, and we need to look at the amount of electricity that would be necessary to power an entire flight of European vehicles. We need to look at what the big car companies are doing and at how SMEs might be able to do things better for citizens. But we've just got this shift to e-vehicles, which is destined to fail. We need to look at all the missed opportunities to do something better.
Lo Fidanza.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Fidanza.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, President, Minister, Commissioner. So we don't want to mince our words. We would expect a great more from this plan. It's good to support the manufacturers. That's something we've been demanding. But you should have an exemption for heavy-duty vehicles. You can't work with electric vehicles on that market. And this is a sector where we need to work with other forms of industry where we're still suffering. It's good that you're going to bring forward the revision of the ICE. That's something we've been looking for, but what's not good is the lack of reference to technological neutrality. I think Mr. Sejourné needs to look at that. We're still facing a plan that is suffering from full electric ideology, a la Timmermans. And I think we need to move back to the digital approach. We need to have a geopolitical approach better than the one we've got at the moment. We're already losing the automobile industry in Italy, and we need to look at reconversion to face the challenges that heavy industry is facing. And we need to look at the public debt and not give in to the lobbyists. We have to continue to defend industry and jobs in Europe, the free choice of consumers and technological neutrality, and let us not see an end to the automobile and component production in Europe. Let's not pursue Timmermans' views, and we're going to continue fighting for this.
Pascal Canfin, 1 minute.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, on behalf of the French delegation of Renew, I wanted to express our support for the Commission's automotive plan in all its dimensions. First of all, demand support. You've put a lot of public and private funding into supply. Now we need to support demand. Secondly, made in Europe is very important. And now in an automotive plan, we're seeing this very clear point for the first time, which is saying that all EU funds should go to people producing in Europe, whether they're producing cars or the entire value chain, subcontractors and batteries. And we need to ensure that we're providing support to battery producers on European territory. We also need to keep the cap that we've put in place so far, and we need to do what we said we were going to do, which is act quickly to change penalties in 2025, to act in a targeted, stable and rapid way. I hope all groups in the European Parliament will have the wisdom to support this proposal.
And now Maïdouline Zbaï, 1 minute.
Chers collègues,
Colleagues, listening to some of you, I wonder where you grew up. I grew up in a place which has lost tens of thousands of industrial jobs in 20 years as a result of relocation of manufacturing to third countries, as well as the economic transformation underway. Now with the Green Deal, the decarbonization of our economy, we're actually doing something which is an opportunity for our industry. So yes to made in Europe, yes to expanding charging stations. Companies have paid out millions in dividends. It's time now to invest in eco-mobility.
That's 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President, honourable members, Commissioner. Millions of jobs lost in the automotive sector in the last 20 years. Spain, Italy, France, Belgium, and now also Germany. In the Commission's plan, 1 page, about workers. They want to give them a little bit of unemployment benefits, then give them random jobs and waste their skills. Like Audi Brussels, for example. Highly qualified workers trained to produce electric cars, now all fired. Instead of making electric cars, now they want to build weapons and move the production to Mexico. Absurd it is. Same with Van Oel, ultra-modern bus company going bankrupt because the Flemish government decides to buy buses outside of the EU. And the EU wakes up now, but this crisis started a long time ago. And they want again to give billions of your taxpayers' money to the same companies who created this crisis. As a former car worker, I refuse to be silent while my colleagues are getting fired by the thousands. We can make electric cars here for a modern, clean mobility. We have the capacity, we have the skills.
Thank you.
So let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Marcin Sipniewski, 1 minute.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Once upon a time, a European car was a mark of class and quality. I had an uncle in France who always drove a Peugeot, Renault, Citroën. That was a tradition. In Poland, we imported thousands of fantastic German cars. Even in the United States, they appreciated European cars because we had the best cars, the best design, and even James Bond had a European car. And then along came some nutters and the e-transformation. This is not a crisis. This is a result of misguided policy. The Audi factory closed in Brussels, and that was the first zero emissions factory. So now we don't have jobs, we don't have cars, we don't have anything.
Ďakujem, pani predsedníčka.
Thank you. Colleagues, the European Union faces a fundamental question. Are we going to carry on with unrealistic green experiments, or are we going to listen to industry, trade unions, our citizens? In Slovakia, we want a sensible transformation of the automotive industry, not an ideological one. I welcome the extension by 3 years that the Commission has come up with, because it would have been ridiculous to impose fines already now. We know that 2035 is a crazy target for banning the internal combustion engine. We have to review all of that, and we have to look at synthetic fuels, hybrids, hydrogen, not just electric cars. European car makers don't need bureaucratic restrictions. They need fair conditions. If the EU can't look after its own manufacturing, in a few years' time, we'll only be seeing foreign cars sold. Our factories will close and millions of jobs will be lost. Electric cars don't need as many workers. We need to pay for reskilling and not just talk about social responsibility.
Thank you, Madam President. Dámy a pánové, žijeme...
Ladies and gentlemen, these are unprecedented times. Our security hangs by a thread and our industry is in trouble. With the EPP colleagues, we've demonstrated that we're a pragmatic force and we put forward specific proposals. We have a clear plan to get the European automotive industry out of a tight spot, and the European Commission listened to us. Thank you. It has taken exactly the course that we put forward: technological neutrality and limits on the emissions penalties imposed on the industry. That's a first step towards increasing the competitiveness of European industry. That's a first step. We need to continue down this path. I hope we will succeed. Ladies and gentlemen, we are delivering on our promises. If we are active, constructive and ambitious, we can change Europe. Thank you.
Much Danica, next 1 minute.
Mulțumesc, doamna președintă.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner. It is good to have this action plan to revitalize the European automotive industry. The situation is difficult. This is what people need. This is what people are expecting. There is an internal market which is flooded with Chinese and other foreign products. And it's obvious why it's obvious why their cars are cheaper, because our manufacturers have to pay taxes and emissions duties. Others don't. We need to obviously help battery manufacturers in Europe. We have research programs, and this is good. And all of this has to enable us to be able to deliver affordable cars.
1 minute.
Mit dem Verbrennerverbot und immer
On the strict emission standards and the ban on the internal combustion engine, we're really not helping the situation. How are we meant to compete with this? And then having penalty payments of at least 15 billion euros being imposed. If you think that's what's saving the European car industry when these penalty payments are just displaced to a few years later, then I'm sorry, you're not going to expect help from this package. Those who are going to get help from this package, that's the Chinese. And if the EU sticks to the Green Deal, it's just going to downhill. We're talking about $1 billion of value creation, a third of investments for RTD, 14 million jobs. That's what we're looking at the moment in Europe. And with this ideological approach that's become a kind of cult, this meta zero emission policy, you're destroying that industry, Commissioner. With the Green Deal, stop with the Green Deal. We don't need any desperate savings plans because our industry will be able to save itself.
Emiliano Salini, 1.5 minutes.
Grazie.
Thank you. I think we all got it wrong in this debate. As institutions, we got our priorities wrong. There's a general framework and targets. You normally have that in politics, but we had this new model, which is that politicians were deciding and dictating exactly what technologies should be used. So we've gone from a market economy to dirigisme, to a top-down approach where we're stifling innovation and we're not able to meet the main challenges. Autonomous vehicles are coming back in the Commission proposal today. But where was it throughout the rest of the debate? We were only talking about traditional vehicles. So there are some points in the Commission proposal where they do hit the right note. I think intervening now in relation to fines is appropriate, and also new forms of technology. I'm also pleased to note that the Commission is saying there will be a revision at the end of this, by the end of this year, that it won't be leaving it till 2026. What kind of revision do we want to see? We want it to be ambitious, yes. And it shouldn't only be moving in one direction. It should be opening up markets so that citizens and businesses can decide what they want, rather than politicians dictating to people what they ought to want, what they ought to want. So technological freedom.
1 minute.
Fru talman.
Madam President, Commissioner, the only way to ensure jobs in the automotive sector is to lead in technological development. It's going to require know-how across the whole value chain, especially when it comes to batteries. We need to increase the demand in Europe for electric vehicles, and hence I'm looking forward to an ambitious proposal on green leasing and other forms of proposals from the Commission. Today we're looking at the automotive industry, but I think we need to underscore the importance of generating the prerequisites for those companies that are leading the development for electric buses and heavy goods vehicles as well. We need to have strong ambitions for charging infrastructure, adjusted rules for weights, etc., so that we can carry on leading development. And finally, if we generate flexibility, in the 2025 goals, we have to make sure we're not going to damage those companies who are actually clearing the bar there, clearly, like Volvo, that they shouldn't be penalised when we're generating that flexibility, because it's only through leading this development that we can save those 14 million jobs in Europe. Thank you.
Ray Krutelek, 1 minute.
Vážená paní
Madam President, Commissioner, I appreciate the fact that you have a specific action plan for the automotive industry. There are some good things there for the future, like autonomous driving and battery production in Europe. On the key issue of fines, though, your help for industry is half-hearted. You should give industry 5 years, as the ACEA wants. That's the collective view of Europe's car manufacturers. Then on the revision of CO2 emissions legislation from cars, if you get down to work tomorrow, by the end of the year, you can give us not just a report, but a revamped legislative proposal. The target date of 2035 is critical and makes no sense. We need technological neutrality and affordable cars which people actually want to buy. And you've completely forgotten about goods vehicles. There, too, we need a revision still this year.
Thank you very much. And now, Jan-Christophe Etienne, 1 minute.
Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, Commissioner, Minister, you can talk about intelligence when you're looking at a regulation that came to being when the world was of a different nature, and that it's time to redefine it. So it's correct, Commissioner, that we do look at this and change it and make sure that penalty payments for car manufacturers aren't due, or that these car manufacturers don't have to give money to the Chinese or American competitors. That makes sense. This flexibility that you brought in, hence, is something we can support. But I would ask for flexibility in the rules to achieve climate objectives. I don't want to water down the climate goals, but I want to make sure that the achievement of these climate goals can be achieved through alternative fuels as well, because that will help reduce CO2 emissions as well, Commissioner. So I don't think we need to bring forward a revision, but your approach, I think, should include alternative fuels that are on the market so that they can be used in the car industry. And a request, don't just look at cars, look at HGVs as well, because action's needed there.
Minute.
Panie Komisarzu.
Madam President, Commissioner, Minister, the automotive industry in Europe is in trouble, and there are 3 reasons for this. First of all, aggressive competition from China, increasing production costs, and thirdly, the transformation which is happening. We need urgent support for the automotive industry. If we don't do this, we risk losing millions of jobs and a serious weakening of our economy. It's 14 million jobs, and there's also Europe's pride, our pride in our car industry. We have to look after it. This action plan is taking us down the right road, but it's not enough. We shouldn't just look passively on and debate. We need resolute action to make sure that the industry can be competitive. And we really need to understand that 2035 is a threat, not an opportunity.
Mr. Jonski, you have a blue card, Dariusz. Would you take it from Mr. Ronsa? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to ask Mr. Jonski this. You said the automotive industry should get financial support, but where is this financial support going to come from when we need 800 billion for European defense? We need 30 billion euro to pay off our new generation EU debts. Everyone's saying We have to support the green industry, but where are you going to get the money?
Debatę na temat obronności mieliśmy wczoraj.
The debate on defence was yesterday. We talked about the 800 billion that we want to invest in Europe's defence, and I think this is something we all agree on. This is what Europe needs at the moment. And then there's the frozen Russian assets. That is also part of the answer. On the other hand, 50 billion invested in jobs, 50 billion invested in the automotive industry. That is a way of saving jobs. In your country, in my country, 200,000 people work in the automotive industry. It's 7% of GDP. We have to find this money in order to invest in the jobs that we still have.
1 minute. There you go.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, President. We're going from bad to worse with this action plan. The automotive sector is yet another missed opportunity. You just love banning things. You want to ban diesel cars, petrol cars by 2035. You recognise that consumers actually don't want this. Sales are in decline, but you insist on dictating to producers what they should produce, and you dictate to drivers what they should drive. All you're proposing is a delay in fines for 3 years, and apart from the social duty, you're doing it all through subsidies, high taxes, spend, and keeping it off the balance sheet of the companies. If you have leasing with public support, you've got Valencia with and Renault in the different regions around Spain, but these problems are destroying the components sector. We've got 15 technology centres and 1,000 companies that are in danger of extinction. The question for the European Union is, who are you working for?
Now to Susana Solis Perez. 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, this plan for the automotive sector is very welcome. It's a critical juncture. Thousands of jobs are at stake. And it is good news that the Commission is finally responding to avoid these huge fines for European producers. Why would you want to hit industry now? You've obliged them to diversify and would now be giving way to Chinese vehicles. But we need some self-criticism too. Is this enough for Europe to recover its leadership role? We need to look at autonomous and connected vehicles for the future. Yes, that's important, but it doesn't solve all the problems of the present. The problems for buying vehicles, the infrastructure for charging, we've only got recommendations for member states there. We barely deal with the problem of trucks. Electrifying heavy goods vehicles is not the #1 priority now. I think we should be more flexible in terms of the objectives. We need to look at the way technology is moving forward. Commissioner, this is a significant step forward, but for the European automotive sector to have a future, we need a strong industry now.
Elena Sancho Murillo, 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, the European automotive sector is at a crucial juncture now. For that reason, we cannot allow further uncertainty. Rethinking current legislation creates doubts for companies. The 2035 target should be unmovable. We need to respect it. There are thousands of workers depending on the sector. We need to be giving solutions within the current regulation rather than endless debates. We should be focusing on electrification. Let's not be fooled. Technological neutrality will not benefit industry. It will lead to more expensive, less efficient technologies than e-vehicles. We should invest in batteries to bring stability to the sector. The answer is not to postpone targets, but to help citizens and producers together with our targets. So we need direct incentives for purchases, we need European social leasing, and we need upskilling and reskilling of workers in the sector so that it is a fair, ambitious reform with no backsliding.
Le monde de demain sera...
I think the cars of tomorrow will be extremely connected and autonomous. We need to have a plan to sort that out, to regulate it and have common standards. But the real question is how these new cars will be driven. You're taking things in the wrong order. You're taking up electric vehicles without looking at how national systems are being ready or not, and whether they're efficient, whether they're affordable. In forcing Europeans to move to electric, you're forcing them to paying for more expensive vehicles, to do fewer kilometers than with an internal combustion engine, with an electricity that costs more because of your ideology. So you're actually stifling progress. Real progress would have been different. We're now putting the cart before the horse. 100 years down the road, you're forcing French people to give up the cars without an alternative. Progress has always allowed humans to live a better life, but now, because of you, it's a synonym of impoverishment and decline.
Siegfried Muresan, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. Look, the automotive industry accounts for millions of jobs in Europe, much of the taxes, and also a big part of our exports. It is in our fundamental interest that it does well here in Europe. Every car manufacturer that you would meet and that you would visit would proudly report to you how they reduce CO2 emissions, and would also proudly report to you how they invest more in renewable energies. I think today the car manufacturers can be a partner in protecting the environment, in reducing CO2 emissions, in improving energy efficiency. This is why we need to do the transition to the green economy with them, not against them. We cannot establish rules here which endanger production in Europe, because that would mean more unemployment, less taxes, less jobs here in Europe. The first and most important thing that we have to provide to every investor is long-term predictability. Commissioner Tzitzikostas, I think you did very well by giving certain flexibilities to this important industry over the course of the next 3 years, solving an urgent problem that we have. But the most important thing that investors need is long-term predictability. We have a target which is in place, which is rigid, regarding 2035. The most important thing that we have to do right now is look into that target and see if and how we can achieve it with the industry, not against, and give to the employers that sense of long-term predictability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muresan. I now give the floor to Diego Solier. 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidenta. Comisario.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, we're talking about laws and deadlines, but we're really talking about thousands of jobs, the backbone of our society, automotive sector that has put Spain in second place in terms of European production. And we're abandoning it. China and the US are providing protection and subsidies, but here we're strangling production with regulation. We are ending up being everyone's market and nobody's engine, nobody's driving force. We need real incentives for local production. We need to support innovation and a firm industry policy which will help supply our own market, protect our workers, our families, and our future. We should not wait to react when it's too late. We should act now.
Solier, and now Matteo Ricci. 1 minute.
President, Commissioner, Europe faces a crucial challenge: maintain their leadership in technological change and be sustainable at the same time. We're going in the right direction, but we need to take clear and courageous choices. First of all, we need to have stability in terms of norms and standards. We cannot change the goalposts. We have to allow people to have faith in how the legislative train will work. We also need to have clear conditions for change. We need to boost digital infrastructure and ensure semiconductor production in Europe and secure battery production. Otherwise, we'll be too dependent on other countries. Using demand as a lever that will be useful to allow electric vehicles to be in reach of everybody. We need to look for further forms of private approach to this. Only this will be possible if we have commensurate resources made available. So the financing that we're looking at today is insufficient. If we want to have industrial competitiveness for quality jobs and transition, leaving no one behind, we need to be more ambitious and more determined when it comes to public investment as well.
To Engin Eroglu, 1 minute.
Ja, sehr geehrte Frau
Yes, Madam President, Commissioner. Up until 2019, the EU had a healthy, well-functioning automotive industry. And then along came Mrs. von der Leyen, and our automotive industry ended up in crisis. And unfortunately, the European Parliament rubber-stamped these bad decisions. And let's stop making these mistakes now. Commissioner, have the courage to give our car manufacturers the opportunity to sell their cars. People choose a smartphone on the basis of which one is going to last the longest, whether they need it or not. And it's the same with the cars. Give the car manufacturers a break.
I take it off 1 minute.
I hear every day that the automotive industry is struggling to meet its targets, cannot afford to pay its fines, will have to lay off its workers. Yes, the sector faces struggles, but these are of its own doing. Some fail to recognize global headwinds and stuck their heads in the sand instead of adapting. Here's a fact. The CO2 targets work. We parliamentarians love to gather here in this hemicycle and talk about European competitiveness. But do we genuinely think that rolling back our targets, damaging investment certainty, rewarding laggards and penalizing first movers will do anything for Europe's car industry other than leave it further behind China's? There's blood in the water and the sharks have smelled it. If you think the car industry has any intention to comply with the targets in 2027, you are sadly mistaken. Instead, their next goal will be to tear down the 2035 goal in total. Yes, the automotive plan contains some nice ideas. Give us a legislative proposal for the electrification of corporate fleets as soon as possible. But opening the targets is a huge mistake, and the Commission needs to take it off the table.
I give the floor now to Raúl de la Hoz Quintano. 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gracias, Comisario. Gracias por la...
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for acting quickly. Thank you for listening to the sector before you adopt decisions. And thank you also for according importance to the automotive sector. Finally, we need to recognise first and foremost that this plan constitutes a significant step forward because it provides solution to some of the immediate problems in the sector's fines. But we need to be honest. It doesn't go far enough, in our view. Technological neutrality should be more than a slogan. It is an absolute need. We cannot face the future if we don't have innovation and technology on board too, allowing us to decarbonise. We need to be much more open in technological terms. We need to be more realistic. And going purely for electrification will lead to outsourcing. Decarbonisation is an objective, of course, but we shouldn't fall into a trap which prevents us from engaging in industrial development. So less dogma, more innovation, less limitation, more incentive.
Now I give the floor to Thomas Pellerin-Caldera. 1 minute.
Chers collègues,
ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you the story of Swazik, who is a nurse in rural Normandy. Every day she takes her car to go and provide medical care in people's homes. At the end of the day, often she's covered 120, 150, 180 kilometres. And since Ms. Swazik has a small car, Renault Zoe, she saves more than €1,000 a year because driving an electric car costs 3 times less than an internal combustion engine. Swazi's story is really commensurate with what we're seeing here. Increase in purchasing power and increase in quality of life, clean energy, European energy, car produced in Europe by a European company. The question that is begged here is simple. How can we make electric cars accessible not just to nurses, but for everybody else? And it's for them, that European social leasing needs to be set up, a simple system to pay 100, 150 euros a month so that millions of workers in rural areas finally will have an access to have electric vehicle freedom.
Philip Turek, 1 minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, the European Commission has listened to our warnings about the fleet emissions fines on European car manufacturers. Thank you for it. It's a small but important change because now they will have more time to comply with the targets. But we must stop the obsession with emissions and cancel these fines completely. We need to reduce or eliminate green regulations, for example, the new proposal on end-of-life vehicles. They do not help save the environment. They are simply taxes that make everything more expensive for our citizens, not just cars. Tens of thousands of workers have already lost their job because our industry, especially the car industry, is not competitive against Asia and the United States. The utopia of the Green Deal was created thanks to von der Leyen and Timmermans' manipulation and corruption. Thank you.
Grazie, ben ritrovati colleghi.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I now give the floor to Ms. Szydło.
Madam President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, the European car industry is a victim of the Green Deal. I think that's obvious to everybody here. And during today's debate, we're talking about how to save jobs. We're talking about how to prevent Europeans being deprived of mobility. We have thousands of people who risk losing the possibility to go from A to B. And every day that goes by, we hear about another company laying off workers. And now we're talking about how to save the Green Deal and save the automotive industry. So we're investing in something that we know is going to be killed off by the Green Deal. There's only one solution. We need an automotive industry in Europe for social and for economic reasons. And so the solution is simple. Dump the Green Deal.
Thank you very much. Please stick to the time because we do have quite a long vote ahead of us. Now I give the floor to Ms. Aguirre Martinez.
Comisario, sabe por conversación.
Commissioner, as you know from conversations with me, this sector is very important to the Basque country, 38,000 jobs, and it's vital to Europe too. We need stability, we need the necessary investment for innovation, decarbonisation and strengthening value chains and ecosystems surrounding the sector. We need to move, as you have said, towards electrification and decarbonisation objectives. We also need to ensure that we can protect those 38,000 jobs at what is a very difficult time. But we would also like to see some positive progress in certain areas. We should not rule out any options for decarbonisation. That means we should consider any form of sustainable fuel, and we should support industries and consumers that are willing to join us on board.
Thank you very much. Ms. Niebler has the floor now.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. Europe is a car continent. The automobile industry and supply industry is one of our core industries. More than 13 million people work in the car industry in my country, more than 600,000 alone. That's Germany. We want that to remain the case. We want these jobs to remain in place. And that's why I welcome the Commission's action plan. It's a very important signal being sent out to our companies and our workers in such an important industry. I think it's absolutely correct that automobile manufacturers be given more time to reach the emissions barriers that have to be achieved, the thresholds, and avoid the penalty payments. Economically, it's a very challenging time. But what is set out in the action plan is one thing, but what's missing is something else. All the other alternatives to propulsion systems should be allowed regardless. The ban on internal combustion engines to be coming for 2028 should be removed, and I hope that we in this Parliament can reach an agreement on that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ferenc. Ms. Ferenc.
Tisztelt biztos úr, tisztelt elnök.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Dear colleagues, the European car industry is on the brink of collapse. The industry is facing serious competitiveness problems and is lagging behind in the global market. The reasons for this are war-driven energy prices and excessive green regulations imposed by the Commission, which make it impossible for a sustainable but competitive automotive industry to operate. Unfortunately, the action plan presented by the Commission is a missed opportunity. On the one hand, it has arrived late, and on the other, it is not comprehensive enough. There has been a shameful lack of consultation with all industry stakeholders in the strategic dialogue, and the direction remains the same. The automotive industry is being held captive by the European Commission to an excessive and inflexible regulatory regime. In addition to the removal of unnecessary and industry-destroying penalties, positive incentives are needed. Energy prices should be reduced along the lines of technological neutrality. Electric charging infrastructure should be strengthened, and all alternative fuel types should.
Mr. Aldo.
Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues, in the past, many people across the world dreamt of driving a European car. They signified progress, quality, exclusivity. However, the sector is gradually losing competitiveness. The threat is from state-subsidized electric cars from China and privately financed models from the United States. Tariffs from across the Atlantic are also creating trouble for the sector. We have to act and act fast. There are 3 steps that are essential. Firstly, the European Union will be successful if international trade ceases to be about power games and returns to a rules-based order. We need to take advantage of our large market and negotiate confidently. Secondly, networks are key. Networks of charging stations, electricity networks, and we will have to make sure that people are able to invest in this technology.
Thank you. Mr. Holmgren.
Tack så mycket, fru talman.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to start by underscoring the fact that now, for the first time ever, we have measured 430 ppm of carbon dioxide particles. That's above the 350 ppm limit, so we have to act now to avoid the most serious climate change. We know over the past 20 months, every single one of those, apart from one, has been above 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial global temperature average. We're finding ourselves in the middle of a very serious climate crisis. This is not the juncture to water down demands on the car industry. And of course, at the same time, you are talking about fining those parts of the car industry that are actually doing well. You need to stand up for the climate goals, listen to the climate alarms, not the most conservative parts of the car industry and politics, who unfortunately seem to have put it into reverse when it comes to climate change.
Mehnert.
Thank you. Ms. Mehnert.
Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kollegen.
Madam President, colleagues, The European Commission has proposed a good action plan to improve the competitiveness of Europe's automotive industry. For Saxony-Anhalt, the action plan is important. In rural areas, people need a car. From the point of view of the automotive industry, it's also essential, given the proximity of the Wolfsburg manufacturing sites. We support battery production in the EU, which will create jobs in rural areas. We also support skills development. It's vital for there to be training programs in order to contribute to a sustainable economy. The CDU wants this action plan to strike a balance. It's important to safeguard the competitiveness of our industry and at the same time provide a future for people in rural areas. Only then can we have a fair and sustainable future for the whole of Europe.
Thank you very much. We now move on to Catch the Eye. There are a number of colleagues. We'll start with Ms. Brignac.
Thank you. The automotive industry is not only a pillar of economy, it is also something that helps innovation. There are technical changes and the necessary Green Deal, but there are money that needs to be proposed in order to help the strategic autonomy of our batteries. But we should not neglect alternative fuels like hydrogen. European automotive industry can have innovation, but only if we prevent unloyal competition from other countries and have good rules. If we want the next generation of cars to be produced in Europe, we now have to have vision and be very...
Thank you very much. Ms. Serrano now.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, the automotive sector in Europe is facing an unprecedented crisis. In Aragon, it accounts for 31% of industry, 35% of exports. There's a clear impact there. Daily production in Zaragoza has gone below half of potential. That's what happened in 2024. And we're predicting a 22% drop in 2025. 30,000 employers have lost their jobs temporarily or permanently in the course of 1 year. So we need to revitalize the sector, and we need to ensure that there are demand-side incentives for the purchase of e-vehicles, charging stations, and made-in-Europe batteries. But we need social inclusion too. We need a fair, just transition directive for the most affected regions, and we need to ensure that the new clean industrial deal will include funding that will support workers as well as measures for upskilling, reskilling and initial training for workers. So yes to competitiveness, but social justice too.
Thank you. Please stick to your time. Mrs. Sardone now, please.
Malafede, ignoranza.
Bad faith, ignorance and a lack of skills. Well, these are the words of what's been said about what's being done to the car industry in recent years. I mean, you've introduced industrial policies, master's environmental policies, and you've increased unemployment in Beijing. They're celebrating. Then your policies have been ignorant. I mean, you didn't need to be a genius. You introduced these policies without studying their potential effects. And then you've also caused problems for families, workers and businesses without any environmental improvements. Now you're trying to put things right, but you're not doing enough. What you need to do is get rid of these targets for 2035 for petrol and diesel engines. Consumers want to see that happen. Are you waiting for the entire sector to fall apart? You should apologise and change course once and for all. Thank you.
Tinkinen.
Thank you. our colleague now, Mr. Tinkinen.
Yeah, Tinkinen.
Arvoisa puhemies, hyvät poliitikot, teitä on syyttäminen. Eurooppalainen autoteollisuus on ajettu kriisiin hölmöllä vihreällä politiikalla, muun muassa ylikireillä päästömääräyksillä. Emme pysty kilpailemaan esimerkiksi kiinalaista teollisuutta vastaan niin kauan kuin ylimääräinen.
Thank you very much. Well, how...
We cannot compete against Chinese industry when the stringent regulation punishes our industries. The automotive industry is a flagrant example of that. I support the European automotive industry because it forms the backbone of our economy and sustainability. 7% of the European gross domestic product is formed by automotive industry, and it creates jobs for 13 million people. Who would want to be down that kind of resource? We have to take care of the fact that we transform into emission-free trade and transport within the limits of our capacities.
A Galiza, o setor automóvel é estratégico e na minha cidade.
The car industry is strategic, and in Vigo, my city, is a key city for Stellantis. And any plan needs to take into account the social aspect, Commissioner. We've lost 22 companies in Galicia between 2008 and 2024, and it's a total of 24,000 jobs have been lost. Stellantis factories between 2007 and 2023 increased productivity 23%, whereas the workforce fell from 10,000 workers to 6,300 workers. In 2007, each worker produced 56 vehicles, but it was 84 in 2023. SIG, our trade union, sees that this factory is one of the most productive, but there's a lot of precarious conditions for workers. The working class is becoming ever more impoverished. Are you taking this into account, Commissioner? There are areas that are highly dependent on the car industry and the social impact.
Oliveria.
Thank you. Mr. Oliveira now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Tanks instead of cars. This is the slogan that they're drumming on the war drums in Germany and in Europe. Factories to produce weapons rather than cars. This is a plan to reconvert the biggest factory in Germany into a weapons factory to the profit of billionaires and multinationals to rearm the EU. For workers, this means layoffs, reskilling, and subsidies. The exploiters have privileges, but for the working class, all we're being asked to do is produce bullets. Workers in the car sector in Portugal need another response. We need to guarantee jobs. We need to have stronger workers' rights and develop industrial capacity and have an economic and industrial policy to satisfy our social needs rather than the profits of multinationals. We need to combine industrial policy, transport policy and environmental policy to improve public transport. These are some of the differences that we could have in an alternative policy.
Thank you.
Vor 5 Jahren hat Frau von der Leyen
5 years ago, Mrs. von der Leyen said that Europe would be the first climate-neutral continent. You know, for years now, we've seen what's happened to CO2 emissions in Germany. I think it has a lot to do with our chemicals industry, our automobile industry. They're not competitive, it's too expensive. And what's happened is that a lot of jobs are being lost. 30% in terms of Volkswagen, 25,000 altogether gone. And in the whole automobile sector or industry, we're talking about hundreds of thousands. And why? Because of the climate targets, the arbitrarily set climate targets that we have here in Europe. That's why people are buying from our competitors in China in order to avoid sanctions from the EU. This is a way of selling our industry down the river. We have clear responsibility here in terms of the Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, the CDU position. They are actually threatening the well-being of Europe and of Germany. So it's not a corrective that we need. We need to basically vote them out.
Thank you. Mr. Sieper, please.
Dear people of Europe, imagine Karl and Bertha Benz sitting here in our chamber today, listening to our debate on the future of the automotive industry. Karl, the visionary, the man who invented the car, would probably shake his head and say, again, the same old arguments. And Bertha, the true pioneer, the woman who took the first long-distance drive to prove the world wrong, would roll up her sleeves and say, enough talking, let's move forward. Back then, people called their invention a devil's carriage. They threw stones at it. They laughed at it. Now, 140 years later, some of you sound just like those skeptics. Some deny the need for green transition, when in reality you're just with another round of green bashing claiming to power, and some cling to outdated models under the pretext of technological neutrality, when in reality you know change is never free. Yes, our automotive industry faces challenges, but progress never comes looking backwards. Instead of protecting the past, we need to move forward. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Tomasic.
Thank you. Mr. Tomasic now, please. Tomasic?
Pozdravljam korake Evropske komisije nasproti avtoindustriji. Moramo pa se zavedati.
Thank you very much. Well, we're seeing the European Union working on behalf of the automotive industry here, but we need to see that one of the main problems is a lack of demand. It's not the industry that doesn't want to move towards electric cars. There is no market for heavy trucks, for example, electric heavy trucks. I mean, they currently use diesel, and that's not looking though as it's going to change. I mean, I welcome the move towards technological neutrality, and I hope that we can get rid of combustion engines. I do think politics here, though, needs to set a framework and establish the conditions for investment and innovation. I mean, that would be a good way to move rather than providing subsidies and bans. Thank you.
Prego. Please.
Frau Präsidentin, die Automobilindustrie.
Madam President, the car industry is an important industry in Europe, a backbone for creating prosperity. And in a crisis, we need to recognise this. And it's good that the Commission is dealing with this in this action plan. It's not in a crisis because of the Green Deal, but it's in a crisis because it has been asleep to lots of innovation going on within the sector, which is why we need to have regulatory stability. 2035 needs to be kept as the end date for ICE engines. The Commission has set the right path, but we need more. We need to try and boost demand. Electromobility is more expensive than combustion engines at the moment. That will change with the ETS, but until then, we need some kind of a boost, and I think that's missing in the Commission plan. We need social leasing, premier support for the European car industry. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Zaleska.
Thank you. Mrs. Zaleska now.
Pani Przewodnicząca.
Madam Chair, the presentation of the European Commission is about prolonging the agony of the automotive industry. No dates, no numbers, no documents that would have to be amended today, tomorrow, or next week at the latest. You've been talking about money. Well, this money is available in the budget. You are not talking about any new money. You've been talking about the same thing for many years, and nothing has changed. You've been talking about the support and strengthening supply chains. Which ones, I'm asking? Rare earth metals? Well, in most cases, we are simply dependent. We are dependent on what is outside of the European Union. And finally, you've been talking about the necessity to support, to help. And what you forget is ETS to this incoming tax a punishment for these citizens who would use combustion engine cars. We have to treat Europeans seriously, and we have to fulfill our tasks and make them fulfillable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Riba-Gine. Thank you very much, President. Well, when we talk about the automotive industry today, my first thought goes to those workers who have suffered the consequences of outsourcing. And I'm thinking about the over 20,000 people who lost their jobs with the closure of the Nissan plant in Barcelona. Now, the Commission knows that the crisis in the automotive industry hasn't appeared overnight. It's taken years. We've seen our production falling behind, and we've seen Europe not moving towards electrification and hasn't boosted the investments necessary. China is competing unfairly. We welcome the Commission's action plan, but we know that we can't simply use the problems now to reduce our climate goals. We need to ensure legal certainty when it comes to investment, and we need to ensure that we have affordable electric vehicles, charging infrastructure, etc. And all of this needs to be done while creating high quality and safe jobs. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Novakov.
Така, колеги, имаме една задача за вас.
Colleagues, I have a mathematical problem. 285 million cars. If they are all electrified tomorrow and we start living in harmony with nature, a question, what will happen at 8 o'clock in the evening when all these cars are plugged? Well, the answer is no light bulb will be on. We need no bans, but a free market. People know how they spend their money. It's one thing to push new technologies. It's completely different to ban others. Thank you.
Now, on behalf of the Commission, let's give the floor to Commissioner Tzitzikostas, please.
Madam Chair, honourable members, thank you first of all very much for your comments and your questions today. I've listened carefully and taken note of your concerns. These indeed include emission standards, technology neutrality, the need to boost innovation, and the lack of relief for heavy-duty vehicles. I also recognise the social aspect of the sustainable and smart transition, as well as the need to safeguard Europe's automotive competitiveness. Now, we need now to balance long-term certainty with realism, with pragmatism. I know that the sector has been concerned about the risk of excessive penalties this year, linked to the 2025 CO2 emission standards target. This is why we are proposing this very targeted amendment by the end of March, offering manufacturers breathing space in the form of greater flexibility. Now, let me be clear. Reaching the 2035 targets for cars will require a technology-neutral approach. We said already that e-fuels will have a role to play, and we will look into e-fuels as part of the review, which, as I said earlier, is now brought forward to this year. But as part of this review, we will also look at all technological developments across the board in a fact-based analysis. And a bit later, we will also look at trucks and heavy buses. Our top priority, honourable members, my top priority, is not only to save the EU automotive sector, but to give it the opportunity to thrive globally. Now, when I presented the plan, I set out how we want to de-risk value chain and build new capacities. The Critical Raw Materials Act will prioritize strategic mining and refining projects in Europe, streamlining permits and providing financial support. We are also negotiating supply agreements with key resource-rich countries. We will facilitate private sector investments and reduce dependency on external suppliers. The battery booster package will further support the EU-based production of battery cells and components. Now, I heard many of you on corporate fleets. More details will follow in our proposal. However, I can already assure you that it will strike a balance, promoting the adoption of technology-neutral vehicles while at the same time avoiding extra burden for SMEs. We are conducting a study to assess various options, and I will gladly share the results with you once they are available. Finally, we must never forget the social dimension. We need to support workers during this difficult transition. That is why there will be more money out of the ESF Plus for training, and also money out of the European Globalization Fund that will be available for those whose jobs are at risk. Honourable members, with all these actions, together with many others that are outlined in the action plan, we will de-risk value chains and build new capacities. We will balance long-term certainty with pragmatism, and we will step up political, economic, and regulatory support. Tackling the challenges head-on will create a future of Europe's automotive industry that is as impressive as its past. We can do it, and I really look forward to working with you in the coming months and years on this subject. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Facoltà ora di...
Thank you. Let me now give the floor to Minister Schwabka on behalf of the Council, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Commissioner, honourable members. I have listened carefully to your interventions, and it seems clear that the importance of the automotive sector for the EU economy cannot be overstated. Urgent action is needed to address the challenges currently facing car makers and to restore the sector's competitiveness. We now need to see how the announcement contained in the action plan will translate into concrete proposals. It will then be up to us, the Council and the European Parliament, to steer action in the right direction in coming months and years. We need to act in a determined manner and send clear messages to both the automotive sector and to European customers. Let us work together to that end. Thank you very much.
Grazie, la discussione è chiusa.
Thank you. That concludes that debate. The voting will take place subsequently. We will resume in a few moments with the votes. The session is suspended briefly.